Great white shark rips apart 450-pound diver near cage. Horrifying attack caught on film. Mayday, mayday, we have a diver down. Shark attack at Poseidon Point. We need emergency medical. Oh God! The radio transmission cuts off abruptly, replaced by screaming and chaotic shouting. Get him up now! Someone is sobbing in the background as another voice, steadier but strained, comes through. This is the Nereus. We have a critical shark attack victim. Massive trauma, bleeding heavily. We're 20 miles offshore from Port Hadley. Request immediate medevac. There's so much blood. The cage is destroyed. Hurry, please, he's dying. Michael Big Mike Donovan never intended to become a shark diving guide. At 45 years old, the burly 6'4" former college football player had spent most of his adult life working on oil rigs in the Gulf of Mexico. His imposing size and 450-pound frame had earned him his nickname, but those who knew him recognized the gentle giant beneath the intimidating exterior. 3 years ago, after a knee injury forced early retirement from the physically demanding rig work, Mike had moved to the coastal town of Port Hadley, seeking a quieter life. His retirement fund was substantial, but Mike wasn't the type to sit idle. He'd always been fascinated by marine life, spending his limited time off from the rigs diving and photographing underwater creatures. When an opportunity arose to invest in a local shark diving tour company, Apex Expeditions, Mike jumped at the chance. What began as a financial investment soon became a passion. Mike took certification courses, studied marine biology texts, and apprenticed under experienced dive masters. His enthusiasm was infectious, and clients warmed to his combination of impressive physical presence and genuine childlike wonder at the ocean's apex predators. Within a year, he was leading expeditions himself, specializing in great white shark encounters. His colleagues often joked that Mike was the only guide who made the sharks look small by comparison. Despite his size, he moved with surprising grace underwater, demonstrating respect for the ocean and its inhabitants that earned him the admiration of marine conservationists and thrill-seekers alike. Mike's personal life reflected his professional transformation. Divorced 10 years earlier with no children, he had found community among the tight-knit group of dive professionals in Port Hadley. His modest beachfront home became a gathering place for after-work beers and barbecues, where he regaled guests with stories of close encounters and beautiful sightings. His younger sister, Catherine, and her 2 teenagers visited every summer, and Mike had recently introduced his 16-year-old nephew to diving, hoping to inspire the same passion for ocean conservation. Just last week, he had finalized plans to launch a non-profit educational program for underprivileged youth, combining his financial resources with his newfound expertise to create opportunities for kids to experience the ocean's wonders. Mike wasn't naive about the risks of his profession. He maintained rigorous safety standards and never took unnecessary chances. Respect the animal, respect the ocean, respect the limits, was his mantra, drilled into every client who boarded the Nereus Apex Expeditions primary vessel. His colleagues, Captain Elaine Parker, Dive Master Ryan Chen, and marine biologist Dr. Sarah Williams, shared his commitment to safety while delivering unforgettable experiences. As he prepared for today's expedition, Mike had no reason to believe it would be different from the hundreds of successful dives he had led before. The waters surrounding Neptune's shelf, a submerged plateau 40 miles off the Port Hadley coastline, were known for their exceptional visibility and diverse marine life. On this crisp October morning, conditions couldn't have been more perfect for shark diving. A gentle breeze rippled across the ocean's surface, and the sky stretched endlessly blue above the Nereus as it motored toward the dive site. The 65-foot vessel, custom-built for shark expeditions, carried a crew of 4 and 6 excited clients who had paid premium rates for this specialized adventure, a chance to observe great white sharks from the protection of submersible cages. October 17th marked the peak of the seasonal gathering of great whites in the region. Water temperatures had dropped to the ideal 65 degrees Fahrenheit, and the shelf's unique topography created upwellings that attracted diverse marine life, from schools of mackerel and tuna to sea lions and the occasional whale. This rich biodiversity made Neptune's shelf a natural hunting ground for great whites, who typically arrived in early September and remained through November before continuing their migratory patterns. Captain Elaine navigated the boat expertly to the designated coordinates, an area nicknamed Shark Alley by local divers. The specific location, latitude 34 degrees 1722 N, longitude 120 d 3845 W, sat at the edge of the shelf where ocean depths plunged from 200 feet to over 2,000 feet within a short distance. This dramatic change in topography created ideal hunting conditions for apex predators, allowing them to surge upward from the depths to ambush prey silhouetted against the surface light. The Nereus was equipped with 3 reinforced steel shark cages, each designed to accommodate 2 divers. Unlike typical tourist operations that merely lowered cages a few feet below the surface, Apex expeditions specialized in deep drop experiences, where cages could be lowered to depths of up to 50 feet for a more immersive encounter. These specially designed units featured enhanced safety features, including emergency oxygen supplies, communication systems, and quick-release mechanisms that allowed the cage to be rapidly retrieved in case of emergency. The company maintained a perfect safety record over its 15-year history, with founder Marcus Reed proudly declaring that our cages have endured over 8,000 encounters without a single structural failure. Today's dive plan was straightforward. After anchoring at the site, the crew would deploy chum, a mixture of fish blood and parts, to attract sharks to the vicinity. Once shark presence was confirmed, clients would descend in rotating shifts of 30 minutes per cage, allowing each participant ample opportunity to observe these magnificent predators in their natural environment. Mike had briefed the group thoroughly during the 2-hour journey to the site, emphasizing both safety protocols and ecological information to enhance their experience and understanding of these often misunderstood creatures. A marine conservation area surrounded Neptune's shelf, with strict regulations governing human activities. All tour operators required special permits, and interactions with wildlife were carefully monitored to minimize impact on the ecosystem. Warning signs posted at the Port Hadley Marina reminded boaters of the increased shark presence during this season. Though attacks on humans in this region were exceedingly rare, the last recorded incident had occurred 12 years earlier, when a surfer sustained minor injuries after being mistaken for a sea lion, a case of mistaken identity rather than predatory behavior. As the Nereus reached its destination and the engines quieted to a low idle, an atmosphere of expectant excitement settled over the vessel. The sun had risen higher, its rays penetrating the crystal-clear water to illuminate the shadowy contours of the shelf below. In the distance, a pod of dolphins briefly surfaced before disappearing beneath the waves, and seabirds circled overhead, their calls carrying across the otherwise silent expanse of ocean. No one aboard could have anticipated how dramatically this tranquil scene would transform in the hours ahead. The particular great white shark that would later be identified only as Subject GW237 in official reports was an exceptional specimen even by the standards of its impressive species. A mature female estimated at 21 feet in length and weighing approximately 4,200 pounds, she represented the upper size limit of her species. Her coloration followed the classic counter-shading pattern, dark gray above transitioning to white below, but with distinctive scarring along her right flank, likely from a previous encounter with a boat propeller or another shark. Her dorsal fin bore a unique notch that would later help researchers identify her from surface observations and underwater footage. Based on tissue samples recovered after the incident and analyzed by marine biologists, GW237 was approximately 32 years old, placing her in the prime of her life expectancy of 70-plus years. Her massive size indicated successful hunting patterns throughout her life, and the presence of multiple tracking scars suggested she had been previously tagged and monitored by scientific expeditions, though the specific tags had apparently been shed or ceased functioning. Computer modeling of her bite radius and jaw musculature would later estimate a bite force exceeding 4,000 pounds per square inch, enough to crush bone and tear through reinforced materials with horrifying efficiency. What made GW237 particularly notable was her unusual behavior pattern. Typical great whites in this region followed predictable hunting routines, appearing at dawn and dusk when visibility conditions favored their ambush hunting strategy. They generally approached potential prey cautiously, often bumping or performing investigative bites before committing to a full predatory sequence. GW237, however, had been observed by researchers exhibiting uncharacteristically bold behavior, approaching boats directly and repeatedly circling dive sites without the typical caution displayed by her species. Some experts theorized that previous human interactions, perhaps through cage diving operations that used food to attract sharks, had created an association between boats and potential feeding opportunities. The shark's recent movements, reconstructed after the incident through analysis of previous sightings and satellite data, revealed that she had been patrolling an unusually small territory for the past 3 weeks, remaining within a 5-mile radius of Neptune's shelf, rather than following the typical migratory patterns of her species. Necropsy findings would later indicate that she had not successfully fed in approximately 4 days before the incident, unusual for an apex predator in a prey-rich environment. Whether this represented abnormal behavior due to illness, injury, or simply a quirk of this particular animal remained a subject of scientific debate. Unknown to the crew of the Nereus, GW-237 had been tracked by marine biologists from the Pacific Marine Research Center just 2 days earlier, less than 3 miles from their current position. The research vessel had documented the shark displaying what their report termed aggressive investigative behavior, repeatedly approaching their boat and even bumping their observation equipment. The research team had cut their observation session short due to safety concerns, but their warning report had not yet been processed through the Marine Activity Notification System that would have alerted commercial operators like Apex Expeditions to exercise additional caution. As the Nereus settled at anchor, the crew began preparations for the first dive session. Mike supervised the deployment of the first 2 cages, while Ryan conducted final equipment checks with the clients. The morning proceeded according to plan, with the first 4 clients experiencing successful dives with moderate shark activity. 3 different great whites, all measuring between 12 and 15 feet, made periodic passes around the cages, drawn by the scent corridor created by the chum line. Client reactions ranged from nervous excitement to awestruck silence as these perfect predators glided effortlessly through the water, their black eyes occasionally seeming to make direct contact with the humans behind the protective barriers. By early afternoon, all clients had completed their primary dive sessions, and Mike announced the opportunity for an additional bonus dive for those interested in a second encounter. 4 clients opted to participate, with the remaining 2 choosing to observe from the boat. As preparations began for this final session, Captain Elaine noted a change in the water's energy, subtle at first, then increasingly obvious as smaller fish suddenly vanished, and the previous shark visitors abruptly departed from the area. Experienced enough to recognize these signs, she called out to Mike as he was helping a client adjust his buoyancy compensator. "Something's coming," she said, pointing to the depth finder that showed a massive shape approaching from the deeper water beyond the shelf. "Bigger than what we've seen today." Mike moved to the instrument panel, studying the sonar reading with professional interest rather than concern. Large sharks were uncommon, but not unprecedented, and they represented the premier experience for clients. Still, caution dictated additional preparation. "Let's reinforce the tethers and do another cage check," he instructed Ryan. "Sarah, prep the camera equipment. This might be something special." Dr. Williams, already monitoring the underwater video feeds, adjusted the external cameras mounted on the boat's hull to capture the approaching animal. "Getting some footage now," she called out, her voice reflecting scientific excitement. "Oh my God, Mike, you need to see this." The monitor displayed what initially appeared to be a moving shadow, but as it emerged from the gloom, the sheer size of the shark became apparent. Even on the relatively small screen, the difference between this animal and the previous visitors was striking. "That's a 20-footer easy," Mike whispered, a mixture of awe and professional caution in his voice. "Maybe bigger." "Should we pull the cages?" Ryan asked, already moving toward the winch controls. Mike hesitated, caught between safety protocols and the once-in-a-lifetime opportunity this represented for their clients. "No, but let's reduce to 1 cage only. Most experienced clients only. Double-check everything." The decision, made in a split second based on years of experience, would soon be scrutinized in exhaustive investigations and ultimately questioned in the wrongful death lawsuit that would follow. The enhanced safety measures were implemented quickly and efficiently. The number of divers was reduced from 4 to 2. Alan Prescott, a wealthy investment banker with over 50 shark dives in his logbook, and Sophia Mendez, a wildlife photographer who specialized in marine predators. The remaining cage was subjected to rigorous inspection, tether lines were doubled, and emergency retrieval systems were tested. Mike himself would accompany them as guide and safety diver, positioning himself not inside the cage but slightly above it, where he could maintain visual contact with both the divers and the boat. At 2:17 p.m., according to the boat's automated logging system, the cage was lowered to a depth of 30 feet. Mike descended alongside, maintaining radio contact with the surface through his full-face diving mask. Visibility excellent, about 80 feet, he reported. No visual on the large specimen yet. Clients secure in the cage. For approximately 12 minutes, the dive proceeded uneventfully. The large shark remained present according to sonar, but stayed just at the edge of visibility, a ghostly presence that occasionally reflected sunlight as it circled beyond the clear range of sight. Then at 2:29 p.m., the situation changed dramatically. Movement at 3 o'clock, coming in fast. Mike's voice crackled through the radio. The underwater cameras captured the moment. The massive shark suddenly accelerated from the gloom, moving with astonishing speed directly toward the cage. Rather than the typical investigative approach, circling, sizing up the situation, GW-237 displayed hunting behavior, approaching from below with jaw extended in a textbook predatory strike. The initial impact sent shockwaves through the water that were felt even on the boat above. The reinforced steel cage, designed to withstand incidental contact, shuddered as 4,200 pounds of perfectly evolved predator slammed into its side at an estimated speed of 25 miles per hour. The primary tether line snapped immediately from the force, sending the cage into a violent spin. Inside, Alan and Sophia were thrown against the bars, their regulators momentarily dislodged by the impact. Mike's training kicked in instantly. He descended rapidly toward the damaged cage, which was now hanging precariously from its secondary tether. "Emergency retrieval! Emergency retrieval!" he shouted into his radio, already reaching for the manual release that would send the cage ascending to the surface. The shark, rather than retreating after the initial strike, circled tightly and appeared to be preparing for a second approach. On tie, the Nereus, Captain Elaine and Ryan scrambled to activate the emergency winch system, while Dr. Williams maintained visual contact through the cameras, providing critical information about the shark's position. "It's coming around again. Portside approach." The second impact proved catastrophic. The shark hit the already compromised cage at a different angle, its massive jaws clamping onto the steel bars with a force that bent and partially separated the reinforced structure. One entire section tore away, leaving a gaping hole in the previously secure enclosure. The camera feed captured Alan's expression of pure terror as he frantically tried to wedge himself into the remaining intact corner of the cage. Sophia, her equipment entangled in the twisted metal, struggled to free herself as water churned with the shark's powerful movements. Mike, witnessing the structural failure of the cage, made a decision that would later be described by investigators as extraordinarily brave but tactically questionable. Rather than ascending to safety, he swam directly toward the damaged cage, deploying his emergency shark deterrent, a handheld device designed to emit electrical pulses that typically repelled sharks by overwhelming their electroreceptive organs. As he approached, he could see that Sophia had managed to extricate herself and was attempting to help Alan, whose leg appeared to be trapped in the bent metal framework. "Get clear! Get to the surface!" Mike shouted, his words garbled through the water but his gestures unmistakable. Sophia hesitated, unwilling to abandon Alan, but Mike physically pushed her toward the surface before turning his attention to the trapped man. The shark, momentarily repelled by the electrical deterrent, circled wider but remained fixated on the chaotic scene. Mike worked frantically to free Alan's leg, acutely aware that the deterrent had a limited battery life and that the shark's instinctual responses might overcome the unpleasant stimulus at any moment. Above them, the emergency winch strained to lift the damaged cage with its uneven weight distribution, causing it to rise in jerky, unpredictable movements that further complicated the rescue attempt. At 2:34 p.m., the worst-case scenario unfolded. The shark, perhaps driven by the erratic movements and the scent of blood from minor injuries sustained in the initial impacts, charged again, this time from directly below. Mike, focused entirely on freeing Alan, never saw the approach. The first indication of disaster came when the water around them suddenly darkened as the massive predator's shadow blotted out the sunlight filtering from above. The attack itself was brutally swift. The shark's initial strike caught Mike directly in the torso, its powerful jaws closing around his substantial midsection. Even through his 7mm neoprene wetsuit, the pressure was immediately catastrophic, crushing ribs and rupturing internal organs. The force of the bite lifted both Mike and the portion of the cage he was working on, carrying them several meters through the water in a spray of bubbles and blood. Alan, still partially trapped, but now suspended near the surface as the damaged cage continued its ascent, screamed into his regulator as he witnessed Mike's massive body being violently shaken in the classic predatory head movement that sharks use to tear flesh from prey. The shark released Mike momentarily, allowing his limp form to drift downward, then circled back for a second, more deliberate attack. This time its jaws closed around Mike's lower body, severing his right leg just above the knee and causing catastrophic arterial bleeding. On the surface, the crew of the Nereus watched in horror as the water bloomed red around the partially submerged cage. Ryan, without hesitation, entered the water to assist Sophia, who had reached the surface and was struggling to board the retrieval platform while maintaining visual contact with the ongoing nightmare below. Dr. Williams, maintaining remarkable professional composure, continued to document the incident while simultaneously coordinating with Captain Elaine to broadcast emergency distress calls. "Mayday! Mayday! Shark attack at Neptune's shelf," Elaine's voice transmitted across all emergency channels. "Man in water, severe injuries, requesting immediate assistance." She provided precise coordinates as she maneuvered the Nereus to better position for retrieval of the survivors. By the time Alan was finally extracted from the damaged cage and pulled aboard, Mike's body had been carried deeper by the shark, now fully engaged in feeding behavior. The clients, in various states of shock and hysteria, huddled in the main cabin, while the crew worked with grim determination to manage the crisis. Sophia, despite minor injuries and evident trauma, assisted Dr. Williams in administering first aid to Alan, whose leg had sustained a compound fracture during the cage failure. At 2:42 p.m., approximately 13 minutes after the initial cage impact, the first emergency response helicopter confirmed receipt of the distress call and provided an estimated arrival time of 25 minutes. Captain Elaine made the difficult but necessary decision to leave the area, recognizing that the ongoing shark activity posed a continued threat to everyone aboard, and that remaining would not improve Mike's chances, which all acknowledged were virtually non-existent, given the severity of the witnessed injuries and the massive blood loss. As the Nereus motored away from Neptune's shelf at maximum speed, Ryan maintained a futile watch off the stern, searching for any sign of their colleague. There was none. The only evidence of the tragedy remained in the blood-tinged water, gradually dispersing in their wake, the mangled cage secured to the deck, and the horrifying footage captured by the underwater cameras that had documented every moment of the disaster. The Coast Guard vessel CG-36728 arrived at the coordinates provided by the Nereus at 3:17 p.m., approximately 1 hour after the initial incident. By this time, Alan Prescott had been airlifted to Port Hadley Memorial Hospital for emergency surgery on his fractured leg, while Sofia Mendez and the remaining clients were treated for shock and minor injuries aboard the rescue helicopter. The Nereus itself, escorted by a second Coast Guard vessel, was returning to port where law enforcement and maritime safety officials awaited. Despite diminishing hopes, a search and recovery operation commenced immediately, with divers deploying at the last known location where Michael Donovan had been seen. Water conditions had deteriorated as afternoon winds created choppier surface conditions, and underwater visibility was significantly reduced by the lingering cloud of chum, blood, and disturbed sediment. After 90 minutes of methodical grid searches, divers recovered only Mike's severed right fin, a portion of his buoyancy compensator, and his emergency signaling device, which continued to emit its automatic distress beacon. Medical examiner Dr. Luisa Ortega, who specialized in marine trauma cases, arrived by helicopter to coordinate with the search team and provide preliminary assessment. Based on the recovered fragments, underwater footage, and witness testimonies, she authorized the presumptive death certificate that would later be officially filed: exsanguination and traumatic bisection due to shark predation. Her initial report dictated aboard the Coast Guard vessel noted, "Subject sustained catastrophic trauma, inconsistent with survival. Blood loss would have caused unconsciousness within seconds and cardiac arrest within 1 to 2 minutes of the primary injury. Death was likely immediate and, given the circumstances, as merciful as possible in such a scenario." The remains recovered were transported to the medical examiner's facility in Port Hadley, where further analysis would be conducted. Additional recovery efforts continued until sunset, but yielded no further results. Maritime officials announced that the search would resume at first light, but privately acknowledged to the family representatives who had arrived at the command center that the primary objective had shifted from rescue to recovery, with limited expectations of success, given the nature of the incident and the region's strong underwater currents. Alan Prescott underwent 6 hours of orthopedic surgery to repair his fractured femur and tibial plateau. His physical prognosis was good, though. Attending psychiatrist Dr. Marcus Feltman noted severe post-traumatic stress symptoms that would likely require extensive therapy. Patient exhibits classic signs of survivor guilt, compounded by the graphic nature of the witnessed trauma, his report stated. Sedation was required when he became agitated during initial interview attempts, repeatedly stating, "He died saving me. He died because of me." Catherine Donovan, Mike's sister, arrived in Port Hadley at 7:45 p.m., having driven 4 hours from her home after receiving the devastating call. She was met by Apex Expeditions owner Marcus Reed, who had been in Japan negotiating expansion opportunities when the incident occurred. Their meeting with Coast Guard officials and the medical examiner was described by attending Chaplain Reverend Thomas Hayes as a study in dignified grief. These people, still in shock, focusing on practical matters, while the enormity of the loss remained temporarily compartmentalized. By midnight, international media had descended on the previously quiet coastal town. Initial reports varied wildly in accuracy, with sensationalist headlines proclaiming, "Monster shark destroys cage, devours diver," alongside more measured accounts. Footage from the boat's exterior cameras, showing the surface chaos but not the underwater attack, had already leaked to several news outlets, though the more graphic underwater recordings remained secured as evidence in the pending investigation. 3 days after the incident, with no further remains recovered despite extensive search efforts, a memorial service was held at Port Hadley Marina. Over 400 people attended, including the entire maritime community, all of Mike's clients who were physically able to travel, and representatives from marine conservation organizations with whom he had worked. Captain Elaine, still visibly struggling with the trauma, delivered a eulogy that balanced professional respect with personal loss. Mike understood and accepted the inherent risks of working with nature's most perfect predators. He died as he lived, facing danger with courage and putting others before himself. We have lost not just a colleague, but a standard bearer for respect, safety, and conservation. The Port Hadley Maritime Safety Board convened an emergency session the following week to review all shark diving operations in the region. Preliminary findings highlighted several areas of concern, including the variable quality of cage construction across different operators, inconsistent emergency protocols, and the lack of real-time communication between scientific research vessels and commercial tour operations regarding unusual animal behavior. Apex Expeditions voluntarily suspended all activities pending complete investigation, though Marcus Reed maintained that all equipment had exceeded industry safety standards and that the incident represented an unforeseeable perfect storm of circumstances rather than negligence. The recovered underwater footage became central to multiple inquiries. Marine biologists from 3 universities collaborated on analyzing the shark's behavior, noting that its direct, aggressive approach deviated significantly from typical investigative patterns. Dr. Emily Latimer of the Oceanic Predator Research Institute observed, this animal displayed hunting behavior typically reserved for prey species, not the exploratory behavior we usually see around novel objects like dive cages. Whether this represents individual aberration or a concerning shift in great white behavior patterns remains to be determined. The most significant policy outcome emerged 2 months later, when the International Maritime Safety Organization issued updated guidelines for shark diving operations worldwide, dubbed Donovan Protocols, in recognition of the incident that prompted their development. These comprehensive standards mandated enhanced cage construction requirements, redundant safety systems, improved communication frameworks between scientific and commercial vessels, and stricter limitations on dive depths and proximity to feeding sites. Marcus Reed, who had participated in the development committee, called the new standards bittersweet vindication, the safety measures Mike always advocated for, now implemented, at the cost of his life. For the wider community, the incident reignited debate about human-shark interactions. While some voices called for culling programs targeting large sharks near recreational areas, the conservation community, including, notably, Catherine Donovan, pushed back forcefully. In her widely circulated open letter to regional authorities, she wrote, "My brother recognized these animals as essential parts of a healthy ocean ecosystem. He understood that entering their world carried inherent risks. He would be horrified to see his death used to justify retribution against the very creatures he respected and worked to protect." The investigation's final report, released 8 months after the incident, concluded that multiple factors had contributed to the tragedy: the unusually aggressive behavior of an exceptionally large shark, the catastrophic structural failure of the cage despite its meeting all existing safety standards, and the decision to proceed with the dive despite initial signs of abnormal shark behavior. No criminal charges were filed, though civil litigation between the victims' families and various involved parties continued for several years. Perhaps the most lasting impact came through the Michael Donovan Ocean Education Foundation, established by Catherine using the substantial insurance settlement and contributions from the maritime community. The foundation focused on ocean literacy programs for underprivileged youth, fulfilling Mike's unrealized ambition, while emphasizing responsible interaction with marine environments. "We teach respect, not fear," became its motto, emblazoned beneath a stylized image of a great white shark swimming in harmony with human divers. 5 years later, a small bronze plaque was installed at Neptune's shelf marker buoy, its simple inscription capturing the complex legacy of that October day, in memory of Michael Donovan, who lived and died in pursuit of understanding between humans and the ocean's most misunderstood predators. The greatest danger in our oceans is ignorance, not sharks.